Ah, yes, finally. We're gonna do a nice little environment, some road, a texture. We're gonna add the HDRI. We're gonna make everything look real good. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add a floor, right? So let's go Shift A and mesh plane, and then that will give us a little plane on the floor. And then we're gonna press S to scale it. And later we're gonna refine the scaling of this. Once we get the texture to to kind of whatever that looks better with the texture on. But for right now, we'll just have something to look at. So let's just kind of scale it this much, and then also I'm gonna move my car a little more to the center. And now I'm gonna add a material to the floor, and we're just gonna call it floor. And later on in this video, we're gonna add all the different the color texture, the bump texture, all that. But for right now, we're gonna focus on the EV render engine, starting it up, and then adding an HDRI before we get to making the floor. So to activate our EV engine, go to the top right and click on that icon. And then our settings, they're gonna be on the right panel here under properties, and then click on that little camera. And here you could choose all the different settings. For right now, I'm gonna turn on ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflection, and motion blur. And later we'll get more into details with all that. But first, what we need is actually an HDRI so that we can make this look real good. So let's go to hdrihaven.com, and we're gonna click on HDRIs outdoor, and then we're gonna find, well, you could use whichever you want, but I browsed all the way down, and I found I've tried out a bunch of these, but this Venus sunrise is really nice. So let's click on it, and we're gonna download it. Obviously whatever size that your system can handle. I think I'm using 4K. And yeah, so now that we're back in our scene, let's add it to our background. So let's click on that environment icon, and then it's not under surface. Where you see color, you click on it, and then there it's gonna let you choose image texture. So find whatever. Environment texture. And so right now it's just pink, and we're gonna go open, and then go to wherever you downloaded that, and open up that HDRI. And now we officially have our own custom HDRI. And once it loads, we're gonna have a good idea of how our final scene is gonna look like in terms of lighting, because now that you choose an HDRI, that's when you really can start tweaking all the different materials that you made for the scene that you will develop. So right off the bat, like for me, this really reflective floor is a bit distracting. So what I'm gonna do is turn the roughness up, and I'm gonna turn the specularity down. The next thing I'm gonna do is change it from a blue to a white, and just to kind of mimic the initial video I made. I actually rebuilt the scene I did previously, just because the first time I didn't record it, I just kind of went through it. So that's why it's a little different if you notice, in the other preview renders. So the next thing we need to do is start moving the EV engine settings around to make it look a little better. So the first thing I'm gonna do is go to ambient occlusion, and I'm gonna move that distance a little higher up so that the shadow is a little more prominent on the floor. And so actually remember, guys, to add a surface under your car, an underbelly. And here in the renderings, I changed it to 256, and you'll see the render you saw in the end was a 256. But then I also do a 16 sample, and basically at 256, every frame is gonna take about 40 seconds, and then at 16-bit, every frame takes about 25 seconds. So that's how it all depends on what type of quality you need and what kind of time you have. So let's add some camera depth of field. So the first thing we need to do is press 0 to get into the camera view, and then press N, and remember to lock camera to view. So this way we can rotate it around, and if you uncheck it and move the center wheel on your mouse, it will make the preview window bigger. So that's why I do that, and then I lock it back again so that so more of the camera scene is inside my viewport. So once you have your camera selected, you go to the settings on that camera icon and click on depth of field. And see, if I move this focal distance around, we actually start getting a live preview of the depth of field. And that's one way of working the camera. But me, I like to use the focus on object thing. So the first thing we're gonna do is press Shift A and add an empty plane axis. And I'm gonna rename that empty to focus. And that's gonna be the focus of my camera. And so it's super easy to just kind of develop that. And then you select it, and then you go back to, you select your camera first, you go back to your settings, focus on object, and then just look for focus. And now we have a locator we can use to focus the camera. We can animate it around. It gives you so much more control over what your camera is focusing on than like trying to figure out the distance or anything like that. I'm not sure if this is a common workflow. Like, you know, it's very common in different 3D softwares like Modo, so that's why I'm using it. I'm not sure if it's common in Blender, but I'm pretty sure, like, you know, it seems pretty much like a no-brainer, you know, adding a locator to an object. And so see, now we can start seeing the depth of field, and it really, you know, once, if I get this locator closer, you know, it really kind of shows the power of Eevee. Like, that looks really nice, especially considering it's a real time. So if we go into our shading tab, and let's say I want to move around my HDRI, start changing the nodes and all that, how am I going to do that? So what I gotta do is down here, I gotta look under object and then select world, and that's gonna get me into the world node system. So obviously we could change the strength around fairly easily. We could change the HDRI from this node setup. But what if we actually want to, like, let's say, rotate the world around? You know, in Blender it's a little more complex, but once you do it a couple times, it's really easy. If you see here, there's a little sign there that says vector. We need to add a vector there to control that. So first we're going to add input texture coordinate to generate a vector. And then we need to actually move that vector around. So we're going to go Shift A again. And the node we're looking for is called mapping node. And you'll find it under the vector tab. So go under vector, and then there you'll find mapping. And so this will give us the ability to sort of move the texture, the coordinate of the HDRI around. So we have to connect generated to vector, and then the vector to the other vector in mapping to the HDRI. So now if we select the different axes of rotation, here I did Y. If I select the Z, now I can rotate around the environment. And I know that seems like a very long way of doing that. But we're actually going to start working with these sorts of nodes more when we do the street. So it's important to start sort of understanding this. The reason behind this sort of workflow is that you can sort of do the mapping for one thing and then attach it to many different textures. And actually we're going to do that with the road. So let's go to cjbookcase.com, and then under textures you're going to go to category streets and download any of the streets that you find interesting, so you could actually do some texturing yourself. And this workflow, once you do it a couple times, it's so easy. And you know, you could do different types of road, cobblestone. There's a lot of different textures you guys should look at and see in this website. And honestly, with this workflow, you could really start doing walls, you know, streets, anything. So click on whatever texture you want. And for Blender, and for right now, we're just gonna focus on the base color, the normal, and the roughness. So download that, and then I'll show you how to put those into your Blender file. So the first thing we're gonna do is actually import those images into this actual working file. So let me make myself some room here, and also we gotta go back into our object mode instead of our world mode. So let's go into the little menu here and go back to object. And so now let's talk about how to add an image. First, we could go into Shift A, textures, image texture, and then from there you could click on open, and then you find wherever you downloaded your texture and all that. That's one way of doing it. You could also just drag and drop it, and that's the most common way of how I import images into my Blender file. So I actually have it here in my desktop. So I'm gonna select these, and then you have to do it one by one, and then just drag and drop them, right? So just put them on your desktop or whatever folder you have, and then just drag and drop them into these nodes. and then now we could use these in the file. So right off the bat, let's just start connecting some so we can see what we got. So let's connect the color here on the base color into the base color, and there. See, now we have, we could see the street, and you know, obviously we could tell that the texturing is a little off. You know, my car would either be tiny or anything like that. So let's start scaling it down and also moving it so that I'm not a crazy maniac in the middle of the street. So you know, let's press G and move it off the y-axis and get it in a more normal looking position. So as you see, as I scale this mesh, the texture is basically stuck into this mesh. It's based off its UV, which right now we're not going to get into it because that's a whole other subject and there's a lot of videos on that. But basically, as you see, when I stretch it, it stretches with the geometry, and so you're gonna want to map those and change the scaling of those. And to do that, we're gonna do a very similar process like we did with the HDRI. We're gonna add some texture coordinates and some mapping. So let's press Shift A, and we'll go textures, and we'll find vector, and we'll find mapping, and then we'll also need a vector. So let's go into input and then texture coordinates. And then so we're going to connect the UV into the vector. And then now this will and then we're going to connect the mapping into the vector of the diffuse. And so now when I move around the scaling, I could sort of change it with this mapping node. And obviously I'm going to scale it to something where it looks a little more normal. And now I could connect these texture coordinates and mapping nodes into all the textures. And I forget to do it in this point, but you'll see a little later in the video that I connect the rest of them. So let's just keep going down with the different textures. Now, I imported the height texture, which you don't need it, but the roughness is a good texture to have whenever you can find texture maps. So let's connect color onto the roughness, and it's a black and white image, and it controls how reflective or how rough the road is gonna be, you know. And right now you don't see much in terms of the texturing because we haven't added our normals. Our normals is like a more advanced bump map. It's basically the normal direction of the surface, and you can use color maps. So and its workflow is a little different. So let's go through how to add a normal. So if you see, it says color right here, and here it says normal, and the colors is different. One is yellow and one is blue. Because that normal wants a normal map. So what we have to do first is we gotta change the color space into non-color, and then we gotta add a node. So let's press Shift A, and we're gonna search for normal, and click on that normal map, and then this will convert your color images into a normal map. So we're gonna connect that to that, and then the normal, we're gonna connect it to the normal. And once we do that, as you can see, the shader refreshes, and now we have some more texturing. And right now it's not in line with the diffuse, but later on I will. And if you see here, I can actually tell that the reflection looks really weird. And so what I have to do is actually add a reflection plane, and that will sort of control my reflections in the scene. So to do that, I'm gonna press Shift A, and here under light probe is where you'll find the reflection plane. So let's add it to our scene. And as you see, as I scale it down, it affects whatever geometry is around it. So let's scale it up so it's bigger than our street. And then we're gonna press G and then Z to move it off the Z axis, and see how I'm aligning it to the correct position. And this way my reflection will be accurate and it will be real time. So so as you see, once we added that reflection plane, now everything's starting to look real pretty. Once I get back into my camera perspective, it still kind of looks like there's not enough shadow. So I'm gonna go back into my settings, ambient occlusion, and that distance I'm gonna jack it up to maybe like 1.8 meters. So now the car feels a whole lot more grounded. So as I'm rotating this car around, I'm sort of noticing that my maps aren't connected to each other. You know, I'm trying to figure out why the roughness isn't connected with the diffuse, and that's kind of when I remember that I forgot to connect my vectors into the rest of them, which, you know, it happens all the time. You know, you're kind of going through the phase of it and you forget that, you know, you're not connecting all the dots where they're supposed to. So if I just go here to my mapping node, and then I just connect the vector to the other vectors, everything is going to start making a whole lot more sense. And now all the reflections and the roughness and all that is making sense because they're all connected with each other. And as you can see, like that like little like patch in the street has a different reflection than the rest of the street, but everything's still looking nice and wet, nice and good. So yeah, this is how you do nice little texturing. And here I actually figured out, if you see in the window and the reflections, if you notice, see how it kind of looks weird like that? And I found out here in the settings, if I uncheck mark the show back face, now my transparency looks a lot better. And so in terms of our scene, we're basically done now. Now we can start focusing on the animation and all that. So just remember that my videos, they're very basic, you know, they're just to kind of show you how I quickly did this scene. But there's so much more to basically everything, the texturing, and even right now when we get to the animation, we're just gonna do some very simple camera rotations, you know, just and render it out. And it's quite easy, and just once you see me do it, it's you know, I think it becomes more accessible. So the first thing we're gonna do is go to the animation tab. So the first thing you notice when you go into your animation tab is that now we have like a sort of a timeline in the bottom, and it comes with two views. And for right now, I don't need the left view, so I'm just gonna minimize it to the side, and then I'm gonna turn on my EV engine, and I'm gonna remember to lock the camera. So let's press N and lock camera to view. And if you notice, I have a bunch of different plugins that I like, but you shouldn't, if you don't see any of these, that's because you know, you don't have these, but they're really cool. I highly suggest you buy them. So down here, it's we got the timeline, right? And it's actually quite easy to basically insert a keyframe, right? So what you have to do is first select the camera and press I, and then here this insert keyframe menu will turn on, and we're going to press lock ROT, so which basically means location and rotation. So I just locked the camera's location and the rotation to 0 frame, and now I moved I moved to 250 frame, and now I'm going to press I again and click on location and rotation, and see, there we go. Now we just made ourselves a little animation. If I press spacebar, you will see the speed of the camera and all that. So it's actually quite easy to start doing some very simple animations. So now the only thing left to do is to animate our camera focus. If you remember earlier in this video, we attached this locator or plane axis to our focus and our camera settings. And so now I want to get it much closer to my camera so that it could like sort of start off a bit blurry, and then it'll sort of focus in on the car. So let's get the locator closer to the camera, and when I press 0, we can see kind of how it looks like. And that's sort of the beauty about EV. Like I could kind of see once I animate the camera, like see how it's gonna look in terms of the motion with the depth of field. And since I kind of like, you know, this as like a starting point, I'm gonna press I again and do the same thing with location and actually not, you don't need to do rotation, just location. And then I'm gonna get out of my camera and move the frames to something like around 90, and then I'm gonna move my focus closer to the car. So I wanted to test out how it would look if the focus sort of went past the car and then it zoomed back into the car. So I put the locator a little bit further back, and then going into a much closer look, more focused on the car, and now when I go to 0 to see the camera, and then if I press spacebar, I could kind of see what type of result I get, and I kind of realized that, especially once I saw it here in this preview, that I felt like a little too complex. I wanted to just simplify the scene. So I want to just sort of delete that keyframe. So it's actually fairly easy and straightforward with Blender. Obviously, you know, you just select it and then you delete it. So that's you hit the delete key, and then that's it. Like now the locator doesn't do that. You know, it doesn't go far back. And actually, you could drag and drop. You could drag the keys around to, you know, to focus on the speed of the focus and all that. You know, this to me is the most valuable aspect of using any real-time engine. You know, like I can see the results immediately, as opposed to, you know, waiting overnight and then being like, oh man, I should have changed the focus, you know, it doesn't seem right, whatever. So yeah, that's another super powerful aspect of Blender. So now it's time to actually export this out and get it rendered out so we could post it on YouTube and Instagram, get all those sweet likes and subscriptions and all that good shit. So first, in my sampling, I'm going to leave it at 16 initially just to see what type of result we get, right? And then we need to save it somewhere. So let's go down to the menu and click on this icon. And here on the output, that's where you choose where you want these images to be saved. And then here under file format, you could change it to AVI to actually get it, but I actually leave it as PNG, and I use other softwares to make these into actual movies. I also go up here and turn on this light because I noticed with the light, even though it's not in relationship to the sun, you know, adding different lights in your scene, you know, it's always, everybody cheats in that sense. You know, when you're visualizing something, you always have to add lights that aren't there just to accentuate the design. So don't worry about, you know, adding a bunch of lights everywhere. And now, before I actually render this out, I could change the color, see, you know, try to do any last minute things to my rendering or to the scene before I actually render it. And once I figure out exactly how I want my scene to look or how I want to test it out first, all you gotta do is press Control and F12, and that is gonna start the rendering process. So, and I'm gonna show you guys for this one how long it takes. And I think for the 16-bit one, I think it takes like 16 seconds, something like that. So I'm not gonna fast forward. I'm just gonna let you guys see it. And as soon as it's done rendering, the frame will show up, and it's gonna start on the next frame. And yeah, this is the 16 sample rendering. And let me show you guys what the difference is between 16 samples and 256 samples. So let me post up these videos. So the first video we're gonna see is the 16 sample video, and I want you guys to focus on the headlights and the reflections in the road. That's kind of where it's more obvious, especially where that sun is and where that internal light is reflected. And so let me show you with 256. And so see, it's a lot smoother, and it only cost me about 15 extra seconds per frame. And so if we go side by side, we could definitely start seeing the difference in the headlight and in the floor. So, you know, it all really depends on what type of quality you need and, you know, what your client needs or what you yourself want, you know. So yeah, this is basically it. I'll put the videos on repeat for a little bit. So that's about it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You know, I showed you guys through the whole process. I hope I wasn't too long-winded, and I apologize for repeating myself. Again, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking my videos. Thanks for all those good comments. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.